Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we chronicle transcendent truth by traveling further up and further into the classic works of children's literature with C.S. Lewis as our guide.
This is Season 9, Episode 4, The Conversation, which covers chapters 13 through 15 of The Princess and the Goblin.
It covers what is, without a doubt, my three favorite chapters of the book so far.
Oh, good. This will be
I
fun.
was so excited to record this a few days ago when we were supposed to meet, and then you just forgot because now you have a kid.
Completely blew it off.
You just have a good excuse now. Oh, so I couldn't make it.
Let's not forget the rescheduled time, which was 2 days later, and you just blew it off because you were, quote, sick again.
It's like, it is harder. The more we keep having children, the harder it is sometimes for us to record.
To both be well at the same time. For example, I might not have a voice in 40 minutes, so we'll see how this episode goes.
We'll see how long we go. Which I like that we've been, are we allowed to talk about this? That we've been trying to maybe scale back our episodes a little bit. They've gotten a little bloated. We're trying to bring them back into that.
No, I don't think we should talk about that.
Okay, never mind.
No, I think it's really fine.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know what this
I think we're trying to have tighter episodes and 10% fewer Star Wars references.
Oh, see, I was thinking we're cutting out more George McDonald
so that we can
fit in, keep the same amount of Star Wars references, which is funny. You know, I think over the seasons, the episode lengths did grow, and a big part of it was we learned a lot more about C.S. Lewis, so we had a lot more to say. Mm-hmm. You go back and listen to seasons 1, 2, and maybe 3 in there, and we just don't know that much. So we're reading through the story and just talking about the story, but we don't have a ton of context or background about Lewis.
Right.
And then over time, we got more background and context. And what good podcasters would have done is said, let's trim out the fat, let's cut out the Star Wars references and all the other things. And we didn't do that.
We doubled down and our audience grew.
Yes.
So take notes.
We even just got an email today. I just responded to an email we got today with someone saying, "Thanks so much. I love the Star Wars references." So
great.
It's usually
now we're not going to stop.
No, they'll just keep coming. Well, so excited for these 3 chapters. I was reading through all 3 of them, and each one was better than the last. I loved the Cobb's creatures. I was like, this is a great one. And then that night week, chapter 14 came up, and I was like, this is even better. And then we got to chapter 15, which is easily my favorite chapter of the book so far, woven and then spun. And we've had a couple of these conversations between the grandmother and Irene, but this one felt I felt like I was almost back in Narnia.
Yeah.
It felt like a conversation between Aslan and one of the children. That's how great it was.
It really has that combination of it's grounded enough in reality that you feel like you can understand what's happening and you can picture it really well. Mm-hmm. But it also has such a magical element to it. And things are happening that don't make sense in our physical world.
Well, why don't we jump right in to the summary here, and then we can start discussing all the incredible things that happen here. I am overly excited to talk about the insane creature that comes through Irene's bedroom window.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet. So let me get to the summary, and then we can get there eventually. As the goblins continue their machinations, some of their pets escape above ground. Before Irene can return to her grandmother, a strange creature with legs as long as a horse and as skinny as a cat jumps through her window. Without thinking, Irene bolts out of the castle and wanders deep into the woods. When she realizes she is lost, she becomes distraught. Thankfully, she sees the light of her grandmother's tower, which guides her back to the castle. Upon being reunited with her grandmother, she notices that the old woman now looks young and vibrant. Grandmother gives Irene a small ring, which is connected to the thread that she has been spinning. Curiously, she explains that the ring is connected at all times to her by the thread. If she is ever in need, all Irene must do is follow the thread to find her grandmother.
It was the original GPS.
Well, we just even had this in the last chapter. We mentioned there was some foreshadowing because chapter 12, which we covered in the last episode, has Curdy doing kind of a similar thing with the rope that his mother gives him. And then every night she kind of untangles it for him. And then right into this next set of chapters, we have a similar thing occurring with our other protagonists.
It's a beautiful, subtle construction of these elements being placed so that you understand the concept just in case you didn't understand it when it comes up, but it feels familiar.
This first chapter that we have here, The Cobb's Creatures, is the kind of chapter that I have come to enjoy quite a bit in our short time in this book. It's a short chapter, no dialogue, and it almost kind of seems to not really go anywhere. In this chapter, MacDonald is telling us about a couple of gentlemen who were there to watch over the princess, and they keep seeing some strange creatures. Let me read this. This is really great. The testimony of the man who first reported having seen one of them was that, as he was walking slowly round the house, while yet in the shadow, he caught sight of a creature standing on its hind legs in the moonlight, with its 4 feet upon a window ledge, staring in the window. Its body might have been that of a dog or wolf. There we go, just for everybody's all-time sake there.
Yeah, speaking of things you did for the first 4 seasons of the show.
He thought, but he declared on his honor, that its head was twice the size it ought to have been for the size of its body, and as round as a ball, while the face, which it turned upon him as it fled, was more like one carved by a boy upon the turn-up inside which he is going to put a candle than anything else he could think of. Incredible.
If they do make this into a movie, I hope that they use the team from Pan's Labyrinth.
Oh, you have to do something crazy.
You would have to. It has to be puppets, too. It can't be CGI. It has to be
we need to
really
decide
well-done puppets.
If there is a cartoon of this. We need to decide if that's going to go on the... We'll watch it for sure. Will that go on the regular feed, or is that more of a Patreon thing? I don't know. But I am curious about what this looks like in the cartoon version, because they're not limited by what's physically possible on screen.
Right, yeah.
Do they really go all out? Because
was it a 70s thing?
I think like actually early 90s, like 91 or 92. I'll have to look it up. It must not have had much staying power because I didn't know it existed until we started this book. Yeah. But so we get a bit of description of these creatures, and MacDonald, as the narrator tells us, that these are the Goblin's creatures. And what happened is that when the goblins went underground, they took many of their household animals with them. And that over time, they kind of devolved into these things.
Yeah.
And we learn a little bit more about the creatures, but then it just kind of ends without actually anything happening. This is why this chapter is so exciting, because like, oh, what does that have to do with anything in the story other than just being some cool world building? But it's in the next chapter where one of these creatures breaks into Irene and again sets the next set of kind of plot movements off. What else did you take away from this chapter?
I love what you mentioned about that transition, because again, he's introducing the concept of these creatures, explaining them, and then we understand what happens when it appears in front of Irene. Also, just there's something about the fact that no one believes the first guy, and then by the maybe middle or 2/3 into the chapter, there's only one guy left who doesn't believe it, and then even he is convinced that these creatures are real. There's just something about the way that information is slowly communicated to everybody, or everybody starts to understand that, oh, this is a real thing that's happening. And it contributes to the overall building that's happening, where an invasion's basically on its way, and we're getting closer and closer to that.
In addition, what makes these creatures so frightening is the way in which MacDonald explains that even though they have devolved in a way, he doesn't use that word, I'm using that word, they have become almost more human-like. Did you catch this part? It took me 2 or 3 times to get through this chapter to pick up on this.
I did not. Tell me what you mean.
Here's what MacDonald says here. They, meaning the creatures, had altered, that is, their descendants had altered, into such creatures as I have not attempted to describe except in the vaguest manner. The various parts of their bodies, assuming, in an apparently arbitrary and self-willed manner, the most abnormal developments. Indeed, so little did any distinct type predominate in some of the bewildering results that you could only have guessed at any known animal as the original, and even then, what likeness remained would have been more one of general expression than of definable conformation. Here's the part right here. Listen to this. But what increased the gruesomeness tenfold was that, from the constant domestic, or indeed rather family association with the goblins, their countenances had grown in grotesque resemblance to the humans. No one understands animals who do not see that every one of them, even amongst the fishes, it may be with a dimness and vagueness infinitely remote, yet shadows the human. In the case of these, the human resemblance had greatly increased, while their owners had sunk toward them, they had risen toward their owners.
Wow.
They're almost, wait, let's pause just for a moment. I used McDonald in an example. I gave a lecture last week on children's literature and its transformative power. And one of the things we talked about was the way in which children's literature, who is reading it, the audience of it, changes over time. And I used The Princess and the Goblin as an example because what I just read to you would not be easily understood by a 7 or 8 year old. Like this Victorian prose here, it might have sounded like I read a dozen sentences. I think I read 3.
Yeah.
All kinds of colons, semicolons, a lot of things happening. And it's fun to read. I enjoyed it a lot. But this is going to be one, I think, with my own kids, when we read this one, it's going to be tricky at first because some of those sentences are a little bit harder to kind of comprehend and decipher.
Even the vocabulary by itself, even if you had it spaced out more, like for example, the page you were just reading, there's no paragraph break. It's all so
one
much
big
information washing over. Very much an older style when attention spans were longer, and
you got paid by the word.
Got paid by the word, and the cost went up by the word. You got to get that little metal type out and make an actual printing press. But I think words like predominate and bewildering, abnormal, gruesomeness, grotesque, countenances, those are not for it doesn't seem like a children's book level word.
Moving back to what MacDonald is actually saying here is the thing that most excited me about this chapter. So what we're hearing from our author is that the goblins, who he never says were humans. If you go back to chapter 1, he says they were very much or
they're
very
like
humans. So again, not quite sure what they were, but it is clear, especially from that conversation that we heard, that Curdy overheard, that the goblins have absolutely changed since their days above ground. And they have become more animalistic, while the actual animals have become more human. What's really interesting about this is you might, at least I would maybe expect, okay, well, over time, maybe the darkness that has warped them, and I mean not just the like physical darkness, but they clearly are bitter and angry creatures, has turned them into something ugly and made them subhuman, less than human. But that can't be entirely true because the animals have become more human-like. Yeah. MacDonald doesn't tell us this is just physical transformations occurring. It's a little unclear. And
I think it's personality and movement wise. There's just something it seems like there's an intelligence about them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's so interesting here. And this felt somehow both very Narnian and like nothing we'd read in Narnia before. It felt Narnian in that we're doing some world building with so few answers given. And I would assume we're not going to get any more answers about this. We're not really going to find out like exactly how the species evolved and devolved over time. I don't think MacDonald's going to tell us anything else. And yet there's something like otherworldly about this whole thing, a word we use often. There's something enchanted about this, but in a very grim and dark way. So this is where it's different than Narnia because the enchantment is creepy, it's freaky, it's unnatural, it's like Tim Burton-esque, right? Yeah, which is interesting because think about when MacDonald is writing, you're starting to have the growth of Gothic literature, and so you have a little bit of that here, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I appreciate both Tolkien and Lewis's different approaches. Tolkien building an entire world for 15, 17 years before writing the Lord of the Rings. And then also Lewis's way of, I'm going to have Santa Claus in here, and I'm going to have some talking beavers in here. And he does seem to talk more about the rules of the world compared to MacDonald. So it's almost like they're on different spots on the spectrum, where Tolkien would be completely, everything has to make sense. I mean, I just read that he was he was making sure that the phases of the moon lined up so that when he described it at a certain part of the book, the moon would be the correct shape.
Yep.
And that level of detail is absurd and so appreciated. But then on the other side, there's so much left up to my imagination that I'm going all over the place with George MacDonald. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both.
Yeah, it's why we like both.
And the feeling that George MacDonald seems to be trying to communicate, it worked. Like I'm feeling that weird. This is not like what I'm used to.
It works because moving into this next chapter here, pretty early on in the chapter, where Irene is in her bedroom, and at some point, here's exactly what MacDonald says. It's in just the first few paragraphs of that chapter. Irene, who had been lost in thought, looked up, saw it was nearly dark, and at the same moment caught sight of a pair of eyes, bright with the green light, glowering at her through the open window. The next instant, something leaped into the room. It was like a cat, with legs as long as a horse's, Irene said, but its body no bigger and its legs no thicker than those of a cat. She was too frightened to cry out, but not too frightened to jump from her chair and run from the room. What's so great about this scene here is that previous chapter has led us to believe that there might be something sinister. This is not just a loose animal this isn't like the squirrel coming through the window. And it's not just scary because it looks scary, because we now know that the animals have become more human-like, and maybe there's some more they're more sentient than we might have originally thought. This now becomes a sinister, creepy thing, not just a frightening scene. Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
It does. And the way that it happens, I missed it the first time I was reading. And then I start reading about the long legs, and I have to go back a sentence and try
it's
to
hard to picture it in your mind.
And try to understand what's happening. But the way it's written mimics how it would actually happen so well. It goes from, I fancy Ludi was longer in returning than she had intended, semicolon, for when Irene, who had been lost in thought, looked up, she saw it was nearly dark. And at the same moment, and then this is the part where it transitions, and at the same moment caught sight of the pair of eyes, bright with green light. And then the description follows. But you're lost in thought with her, and then all of a sudden there are these eyes, and then you're seeing this really, really fantastically creepy creature.
Do you regret not drawing this creature?
Yes.
for the podcast.
Definitely.
The seasonal art.
But I am thinking, I have a picture in my mind. If I can get that out, I would love for that to be the art for our
that'd be
yearly
wild.
thing. Yeah.
That's
for our
so
Patreon top level
Patreon,
people.
Yeah. It is really something. So she bolts out of the room. Makes sense. It's freaky. And in kind of her franticness, just leaves the castle and runs straight out, really all the way into the mountain, which we know that she's not supposed to do, and pretty quickly becomes lost. And it's while she's here, lost in the mountain, she's like, how do I ever get home? Once she realized this creature hasn't followed her. Mm-hmm. And she looks up, and what does she see?
It's a glowing orb.
That same orb that we saw inside Grandma's room a few chapters ago. That one that she gave us that really weird line where she said, if it wasn't glowing, my room would look bare and dim. Or what was it? Like, she said something along those lines.
Yeah, also something that doesn't really make a ton of sense.
No, not at all.
Except that it does make sense if you let go of the world
she
you're
told
used
us
to.
this is how the pigeons know where to go to, but we also know that she has walls all over her room, and yet that's not what Irene is seeing. Mm-hmm. And so this chapter is relatively short because Irene just starts following the light. There's a couple of things that are interesting here. Listen to what MacDonald says. Dark as it was, there was little danger now of choosing the wrong road. And, which was the most strange, the light that filled her eyes from the lamp, instead of blinding them for a moment to the object upon which they next fell, enabled her for a moment to see it, despite the darkness. By looking at the lamp and then dropping her eyes, she could see the road for a yard or two in front of her, and this saved her from several falls, for the road was very rough. This is almost like too on the nose for what MacDonald's... No, I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's so incredibly clear that this is, in many ways, there's other things that are happening here, but this is absolutely an allusion to the disciples and Jesus walking on water, right? And Peter jumping out and starts sinking. And for people who aren't familiar with the story, when Jesus is walking on water in the Sea of Galilee, Peter gets out and is told to walk towards Christ. He walks towards him, but when he begins doubting, when he takes his eyes off Jesus, he starts sinking.
If you fix your eyes upon Jesus, you're going to be able to keep going.
Yeah.
And she's able to keep going because she's looking at this orb.
Exactly. This orb is illuminating everything else around her. I mean, did you pick up on this when you're reading it?
But it's illuminating her. It's the light's going into her eyes, and then she's able to see it. I feel like that's different than it's illuminating everything around her.
Oh, you're right. It's illuminating her eyes and allowing her to see.
Right. Which is not how light works in this world again, but that's part of what makes it so special. Another place that I had to reread several times because I thought they were saying that every time when they looked away, they were temporarily blinded because your eyes have to adjust, but it was actually the opposite, which again lends to this magical world.
Yeah, there's that really famous quote from Lewis that it doesn't come from Mere Christianity, although a lot of times I think a lot of people accidentally attribute it to Mere Christianity. It's maybe a essay, like is theology the same as poetry or something like that? I'll find it. I'll put it in the episode's description. But Lewis has that very famous quote, "I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else." It's that same kind of idea that as Irene is looking towards this orb, she's then able, through the light that comes through that, to see it. Again, this is almost in some ways kind of an inverse of the allegory of the cave. So remember back at the end of last battle, we talked about how Plato's idea is that the prisoners inside the cave are seeing poor reflections of the real thing. So when we talked about the theory of forms that we saw at the end of last battle, we said that everything has a one true form, and here in our world, we're seeing almost a kind of lesser form, a less perfect form. The opposite appears to be what MacDonald and Lewis are referring to here, which is that Christ, but Christianity, our faith, does the opposite. It actually illuminates, like, I don't have my notes in front of me to like work this metaphor out perfectly, so maybe we'll get better at it as the season goes on if this does come up again. But instead of saying, oh, the prisoner has to escape into the real world and see these things in person, it's almost as if the prisoner actually has to look at Christ in order to actually comprehend what is real and what is true.
Yeah.
And so that's illuminating everything else. Everything else makes sense, not out of a simple escape from the world around us, but instead of escape to the one who created the world.
Right. Any
other things for this chapter? Because then she gets back and she runs in, and we've still got this incredible chapter 15 to touch on.
It's almost a miniature hero's journey where she leaves and then she comes back. And
that's great.
Her heart's growing stronger. She's learning to trust. And as we'll see in the next chapter, she does regret running. That probably wasn't the best idea, but her grandmother consoles her, and we'll talk about that in just a moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go ahead and talk about it now. Irene runs back up the stairs, and she finds Grandma in her... I feel Grandma feels too familiar. She finds the grandmother, in her bedroom. And what's the very first...
In her grandmother's bedroom.
Yeah, in grandmother's bedroom, What's the very first thing that she notices, Phil?
Well, the first thing I noticed is just the speech is so... It cuts through and it's so clear. She actually goes to one room. Oh, yeah. The illustration in your book's pretty...
Yeah, I just showed it to Phil. We'll talk about it later.
Pretty fun. It's the clarity and the simplicity of "Come in, Irene." And she's just being invited in again. And then shut the door behind you. I always close the door of my workroom when I go into my chamber. And we're solidly out of the outdoor terrified space and now back in the comfort. But also this isn't a super comfortable spot. This is someone that she doesn't know super well, but that she is beginning to trust. I think she already knows that her grandmother helped her get back after she had run away.
Additionally, MacDonald tells us, he gives us an exact number, that the grandmother looks to be about 3 and 20. So that's a little weird. That's a little odd. And when
How many
Irene,
score ago would that be?
when Irene asks her about this, she talks about the fact, she says, "Are you younger because of your crown?" And eventually she asked, this is later in the chapter, but she's like, no, I felt younger, so I put on my crown, which is, again, a little confusing.
It's because I felt so young that
we don't really get an answer here. But in this conversation, Irene comes in. She's disgusting. She's dirty. She's been out in the mountains. And grandmother's wearing this beautiful blue dress. And grandmother says, "No, still come hug me. I know you're a mess. I want you to come hug me. I'm not worried about it." And here's what MacDonald writes. As she spoke, she set her down, this is the grandmother, and Irene saw to her dismay that the lovely dress was covered with the mud of her fall on the mountain road. But the lady stooped to the fire, and taking from it, by the stalk in her fingers, one of the burning roses, passed it once and again and a third time over the front of her dress, and when Irene looked, not a single stain was to be discovered. I think this is such a beautiful
brings
picture.
us to our sponsor, the Tide to Go Pit.
Well, I was going a different way with that, but that's okay. I was going to say this is just such a beautiful picture of the way in which we know, despite all of our sin, we can come to God, right? As dirty and as filthy and as sinful as ever, right? And we know that we are forgiven. Our sin and wretchedness cannot stain him.
Right. Yeah. Because in this example, it's such a powerful force that it just cleanses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
More in this conversation. Tell me, I mean, there's so many weird things happening here. Let's talk about the fact that just after this, the walls disappear. Can you tell me about this scene?
Yeah, so we get a scene that is built for the LED stage at Disney. Just some wild stuff happens.
I hope Disney never adapts this movie or this book into a movie.
Don't worry, they probably won't. And if they do, they'll probably just pull it out of the out of Disney Plus. She's gazed at the lamp for several minutes, but then all of a sudden the walls disappear. She can hear the wind blowing, but she doesn't
feel it.
She doesn't feel it, which is very strange.
Uh-huh.
Which also makes me think of special effects. You can
real.
see everything,
Yeah.
but you can't feel it. It's the opposite of what wind usually is, where you can feel it, but you can't see it. The clouds part, and then they gather again, and the lady stands beside her and says that with the loveliest smile on her face and a shimmering ball in her hand, about the size of a pigeon's egg. So all of this was a distraction while she got this gift ready.
But whatever, these pigeons, and then Irene herself, when she was lost in the mountains, it appears actually, literally the walls are disappearing, I guess. And that orb that's glowing in the grandmother's room is actually shining out through the walls, or the walls are just disappearing. And then there's that interesting line. I love this. The clouds gathered again and shut out the stars. The wall gathered again and shut out the clouds. So as she's staring out, everything kind of just comes back together, and now the room is back together once more. And this is weird. There's not a lot of explanation given for this. We're not told if this is magic or what exactly is going on. And the grandmother doesn't give us much to go on either, because we go into this conversation that you just alluded to, which is she hands her what she's been making. She gives her this ball of string saying, "This is my work for you." It's all the spinning that she's been doing. And inside of it is, or she comes back, she gives her the string, and then she also has a small ring with a fire opal inside of it. That I love this. She says, "Oh, thank you, grandmother. It's prettier than anything I ever saw, except those of all colors in your, please, is that your crown? Yes, it is my crown. The stone in your ring is of the same sort, only not so good.
Because you're a child.
Yeah.
Gotta work up to
You're
it.
a kid, so you didn't get the nice one yet.
And it has only red, and then hers has all the colors.
So she gives her this ring, and before she even describes it, here's some more really weird stuff that happens. Irene says, "What am I to say when Ludi asks me where I got it?" This is so wild. The grandmother says, "You will ask her where you got it." And she's like, "I don't see how I can do that." "You will, though." This is wild.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi when he said, "He will come to me," which is, it's always very silly to hear James Earl Jones make a question through it. It just sounds weak.
Yeah, his voice is not usually
Darth
doing
Vader
that.
shouldn't be asking questions
But
unless they're threatening questions.
it's the
Like,
one.
where are-
It's
you
the
know,
one
where are the
person that he would be asking a
to
question
the Emperor too. Yeah.
So he kind of played the role perfectly.
Yeah, but
Just like Hayden Christensen.
I don't know about that. What am I to say to Ludi when she asks me and says, "You will ask her where you got it"? Again, it's crazy. And then McDonald just moves on. I mean, this is so much fun for me because as a reader, I am utterly confused as to what could possibly be going on here. And it does seem like the grandmother knows everything that's going on. She's very aware of all of it.
This entire chapter is, the thing we thought, okay, well, it's the opposite. The walls aren't there either. And then here's this gift, and then she takes it away. It's all very confusing.
Yeah, why does she take the gift away?
She takes it away. Irene is concerned that maybe she did something to vex her great-grandmother, and her grandmother just indicates that she's going to keep it here for her, but then it's connected to the ring that's on her hand.
Yes. So after it's been confusingly thrown into the fire, our conversation between Irene and the grandmother continues, and Irene puts the ring onto her
And
finger.
it gets really creepy.
Yeah, it'd be wild. I said it was, a little creepy in here. So she puts the ring onto her finger, and we're told, I won't read the whole thing here, but the grandmother tells us that the thread that she has spun through those spider webs from across the sea is somehow connected to the ring all the way back into her own bedroom. And that the thread is so thin that you cannot see it. But here's what's important. Let me read what she does say here. The grandmother says this: "If you ever find yourself in any danger, such, for example, as you were in this evening, you must take off your ring and put it under the pillow of your bed. Then you must lay your forefinger, the same that wore the ring, upon the thread and follow the thread wherever it leads you. But remember, it may seem to you a very roundabout way indeed, and you must not doubt the thread. Of one thing you may be sure, that while you hold it, I hold it too." This sounds like Aslan.
Just does.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
This idea that we have here of, you're going to have to trust me. If something happens, you can trust me, but the acknowledgement of it might not feel right in the moment. It might not feel like things are going well. In fact, even if you pull on this thread, it might not bring you directly to me. It might take you in a roundabout way. I mean, how on the nose is this for the Christian faith, right? I promise I'm with you. I promise you're safe in the long term,
Right.
eternally, but maybe not in the short term. And so it might feel like a roundabout way of getting there.
Yeah. Yeah, I really have appreciated how direct some of these allusions and metaphors are to our Christian faith.
And I think this is where the children's literature aspect of it really comes to the forefront. Because as I mentioned earlier, with some of the prose and some of the Victorian language, there might be a lot of things that just are pretty dense here for a child to read or even have read out loud to them. But parts like this, I think, are pretty easy to latch onto. And I think this is where McDonald does such a fantastic job as a children's author, is that, okay, even if you're having trouble with the prose, I think most 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds who grew up in or around the church would be able to pick up on some of these things, even if the prose itself is tricky.
Right.
And that's what's great, is that even though time changes and we're now, we're 150 some years, right, after this book has been written, those truths still remain, which is also just so encouraging going back to old books like these.
Right.
To go, that makes sense now, and it made sense in 1872.
Yeah. And it was strangely helpful to me just to have this reminder in a book probably meant for a younger crowd. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how well that can work. And I think it does help that this is speckled with words like rheumatism and crookedness and witheredness and feebleness. And it is both at a higher level, but also simplified and aimed at a younger mind.
Yeah. Another thing you want to talk about in this chapter, there's a little bit more here where Irene apologizes, realizing that she was sitting down and grandmother was standing up. And grandmother also talks about how, she's very old, but it's silly of people to think that, old age is a bad thing. Is there anything else you want to talk about here in this chapter?
Yeah, there's a strange moment here where she tells her grandmother that her grandmother never seems to be afraid of anything. And her grandmother's response is, "Not for long, at least, my child. Perhaps by the time I am 2,000 years of age, I shall indeed never."
Yeah, just drops that one in there.
There's something about the 2,000 years piece feels pretty close to the time since Jesus was on the earth, and I'm curious if there's anything there. Or maybe he's just pulling a number out, but everything else has been so lined up. I'm curious if that's why this is happening.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place for us to stop with these 3 chapters. I had so much fun, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, with these, and I am really looking forward to our next 3 episodes. What are those chapters? What are that? 16, 17, and 18? Is that right?
Well, for the next 3 episodes, or the
next 3 chapters. Excuse me.
Yeah. Chapter 16, The Ring, which is a whopping 2.5 pages.
Okay.
So go ahead and read that one night.
Yeah, start prepping now.
That's right. 17 is Springtime, and 18 is Curdy's Clue.
And in those 3 chapters, the king, Papa, is going to return for a visit, and Irene is going to ask him some questions about the ring. Well, before we go, though, Phil, we do have some listener feedback. Really, actually, 2 things here.
Ooh.
We've got a voicemail as well as a gift.
Wonderful.
Let's go ahead and take a listen to this voicemail.
Hey, Daniel and Phil. This is Jack Kirk. I wanted to reach out and ask about, with The Princess and the Goblin, are you reading the version with the interruptions that MacDonald adds in from his young listener? When I was looking for a version to listen to this morning before starting your first episode of this season, I was listening to some samples on Audible and figured out there's 2 different versions. And the original versions has these interruptions of conversation in between the author and the reader, kind of Princess Bride style. And the one in the first chapter actually answers the question of that's in the title that the chapter doesn't actually answer, of why the story is worth telling, and why should we know the story of this princess. So just curious because you didn't talk about it in your first episode, and interested to hear your thoughts on those interruption sections.
That's a really interesting question. I didn't know anything about this. I also, in the middle of that voicemail, thought about The Princess Bride. And I was curious if
that's what MacDonald was thinking about?
Well, no, if it was something that was added later, post 1987, when The Princess Bride came out. Is that right?
Something added later in this book?
So, like, editions that have been printed after The Princess Bride, if it was added then, or if they're... Which version am I reading if I don't have the interruptions?
Interesting.
Are there 2 versions from the 1800s that we're looking at?
I want to say this is such a great voicemail from Jack because it led me to a lot of questions of which I don't have a lot of answers yet. So the reason
How fitting for what we just read.
We said that, back that we got a little bit out of our novice comfort zone with Lewis as time went on, and now here we are back in that zone.
Our next podcast is going to be about chemistry and science.
We got at the same time, right around the same time that Jack sent us this voicemail, you got a gift. It was the one that only you got an email from, but I'm holding it in my hand right now.
As soon as I got it, Daniel said, "I'm taking this."
I'm the only one who has the key to the P.O. box, so that is a little bit nicer.
I did make Daniel go pick it up.
David Bates, our friend over from Pints with Jack, sent us a physical copy of The Princess and the Goblin.
Embossed with gold.
Embossed with gold by Walking Together Press. And this is one that was just not printed by the Rabbit Room. I just mentioned it was printed by Walking Together Press, but it can be purchased through the Rabbit Room. And it's got some new illustrations, some really beautiful works of art. Interestingly enough, anime style. So that caught me off guard a little bit, but I've really grown to actually quite like it. I don't know anything about anime.
I will say it feels very fresh and very new. And very different in a good way.
Yeah, I thought that I wasn't going to like it, but I've actually, as I've been reading through this copy, have really come to enjoy it. I love the way some of the letters are at the very beginning of each chapter. The font looks great. Really just a great copy of the book. We'll definitely include a link to it in the episode's description. But the reason I bring it up now is so far, the copy of the book that I've read is, like the physical copy, is that Puffin Classics version and some stuff on Kindle, which, by the way, no one will have heard these yet because we edit them out. There have been multiple times throughout the season, and already maybe, twice tonight, where I've been reading from The Princess and the Goblin from my Kindle, and the word has been incorrect. And you've asked me if I did it on accident or not. And I'm like, no, This is what the word that it actually says.
Yeah, I thought Daniel was having some trouble.
Just struggles, yes.
You've had half a beer.
I had the word double in my Kindle version is really the word doubt in the print version. So that changed some things. It was telling earlier, the grandmother was telling Irene not to double the thread in my version. I was like, I don't really understand what that means. It's like, oh no, it's actually doubt the thread. But in all of these versions that I've read, none of them have had these interruptions until we got this copy from David Bates right around the same time that Jack sent us this voicemail that has these interruptions. And I want to actually read from the very first chapter so people can get a sense of what exactly Jack is referring to. Here's chapter 1, Why the Princess Has a Story About Her. There once was a little princess who... But Mr. Author, why do you always write about princesses? Because every little girl is a princess. You will make them vain if you tell them that. Not if they understand what I mean. Then what do you mean? What do you mean by a princess? The daughter of a king. Oh, very well. Then every little girl is a princess, and there would be no need to say anything about it, except that she is always in danger of forgetting her rank and behaving as if she had grown out of the mud. I have seen little princesses behave like the children of thieves and lying beggars, and that is why they need to be told they are princesses. And that is why, when I tell a story of this kind, I like to tell it about a princess. Then I can say better what I mean, because I can then give her every beautiful thing I want her to have. Please go on. There once was a little princess whose father was king over a great country full of mountains and valleys. That's not in any of the copies of the books.
We haven't seen that until we got these copies. Yeah,
and it occurs in a couple of the chapters. In chapter 3, we have a similar thing occurring. I'll read this one. I won't read all of it. A very old lady sat spinning when we first come across the grandmother. Oh, Mr. Editor, I know the story you're going to tell. It's the Sleeping Beauty, only you're spinning too and making it much longer. No, indeed, it is not that story. He then goes on and says why it's not that story. There's multiple times throughout the book where we get an aside of a conversation between the listener and the author of the book. And I'm going to be honest, I've started Googling stuff over the last few days. I can't find anything easily. I've looked up like Princess and the Goblin interjections, Princess and the Goblin interruptions from the reader, and all these things, and nothing. I found people talking about it, but I have not actually been able to find out why some versions have it and some don't when it came. I've sent out an email or two to some people who I think might have the answer, but I just haven't heard back yet. But a quick Google search did not give me the answers I was looking for.
Yeah.
I'm hoping maybe you might know, or that we can. No,
I was hoping you would. I will say one last thing about this edition that
tell us about
is
it.
really wonderful is there's in a magazine how the first letter will be larger.
Sure.
Or certain books will have this too. Mm-hmm. If it's the
almost
same,
like an illuminated manuscript from the Middle Ages.
That's what I was getting to. Is this one has illuminated ones, but and if it's the same typeface, then it would be a drop cap.
Oh, okay. I didn't know this.
In this version, we have illustrated ones that are much more decorated, and they're very nice.
Yeah.
To look at. Yeah.
And again, I'll leave a link to that in the episode's description. And if anyone else knows where this is coming from, I was just a little baffled here because it didn't come up easily. And who knows, maybe in the next few days I'll hear back from two of the people I reached out to. One was your dad, but I don't know if he'll know either.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading another book by John McPhee called Draft Number 4, and he talks about fact checking and how difficult certain things can be to fact check, but also how important it is to make sure you know the answer before you publish, because then it starts getting copied by other people.
In other words, don't start podcasting before we know what's actually going on.
Well, I was going to say, I want so badly to say what it is with the voice of authority, but I think we should find out first.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing this to our attention. I'm really happy that we got this voicemail from Jack a few days before we got the actual book, because I would have been really confused.
Yeah.
And I would have thought it was just in this particular.
Right, because it does so many things that are different than what
it does things that are different, and you and I have multiple copies of the books that don't do this, and yet we now know that there's other ones out there, unless Jack is also reading the same version that we are, but from Walking Together Press. But I assume that it must really be out there in other versions as well.
Right.
Do you want to make a hypothesis? Do you think I assume these are George MacDonald's words, but you don't seem to be convinced of that.
I'm not, just because the standard ebooks version doesn't have it. I'm wondering if some publisher recently, as in the past 60 years, added it, or maybe even it seems like a 1900s thing.
Well, that would have been 60 years ago.
Right. But 1900s, early 1900s.
Oh, okay. Early 20th century. Yeah, I don't know. It does very much. You read that beginning of chapter 1, and that is what we have been told and what we have seen throughout this book so far is princesses need to behave like princesses. That's what makes them a princess. Mm-hmm. And so hearing him explicitly say that, I think, is helpful and does sound like MacDonald. Whether or not it's his words, we'll have to see.
Here's my best guess. I think that there might be two versions of this story from George MacDonald, and some people believe that the one with the narrations added is the most complete one. But I imagine that's up for debate. Maybe an editor, when it was first published in the 1870s, it was like, oh, you got to cut this out.
This is too silly or something like that.
Yeah.
I like it though. I enjoy it.
I can see how.
I don't think you like it very much though. Okay, yeah.
I'll just say I don't understand it. I don't like it. And I think
it better not be George MacDonald, or else I'm not going to like this book as much. Well, any final thoughts? And again, Jack, thank you so much for this voicemail. This was. We get so many great voicemails and emails. We love them all, but this particular one kind of illuminated something that we were unaware of.
Yeah, and thanks to David for the book. That was
so
absolutely.
Fun and thank you to David for the book. Curious again why only Phil got the email and why it was mailed to his name. But other than that, thank you. I assume, you know what it probably is?
You know what you need?
Matt Bush
you
sent
need
me
a Pints
one.
with Jack coaster.
Oh, I have one.
Right. That's why I got the book.
Oh, okay. That's fair. All right. I assume they're going to wait and send me Princess and Crew.
You're more of a swag guy. I'm more of the scholarly.
Oh, okay.
Get a bunch
That's
of
fair.
books.
That's fair.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead?
That's some thinly veiled contempt for our international listener that keeps leaving the reviews.
Why don't we go ahead and wrap this episode up? And also special thanks. We have a brand new listener or a brand new supporter at the Aslan's Country tier, $25 a month, and that is Ian Wooten. So shout out to Ian Wooten.
Hey.
Thank you so much for supporting us.
Just in time for some art.
That's right. Oh, that's true. Yeah, Ian signs up and gets some art here at the end of the year. Are you? I couldn't tell. Were you being facetious? Are you really going to draw the freaky looking cat?
I'm really leaning toward it right now, but it's going to be difficult to get the vision in my head onto
Yeah.
a digital
Do
piece
you think
of
anyone
paper.
cancels their subscription? They're like, that's terrifying. I'm not hanging that up in my house.
Yeah. It is
Yeah.
very important that you consider what you draw if you want people to hang it up. I have some beautiful art that my wife makes me keep in my office because it has the color red and it reminds her of blood.
I will still say that what you hung up, or not what you hung up, but what you did last year of the Black Knight from the Silver Chair is hanging up in my classroom. I have pictures of all the art that we study, and a little like tagline
Yeah.
of like, this is,
It's
you
the
know,
first
this is
time I've
Thomas
ever
Cole
I've
from,
had my name in the year.
I did. I put Phil Wisenhunt 2024. I think I did like digital illustration, and then I always have after it where it's is. So like I might say like this is for like a Thomas Cole painting that I have. I'll say this is the Voyage of Life, or it's oil on canvas from I don't know what it is, like 1830 maybe or something right around then, and then it's in the National Gallery of Art in Washington D.C. The one that you did, it says something like Phil Wisenhunt, The Black Knight, digital illustration 2024. Right here. This is
It's in my classroom.
I thought it was really funny. None of my kids have thought it was funny, but that's pretty,
They'll
that's
get
usually
there.
how it goes with my jokes.
This is why education's so important.
Yeah. Well, this episode is made possible by patrons over at patreon.com, just like Ian Wooten. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Not just to Ian, but special thanks goes to all of our supporters at our top tiers. That's John Marr, Emily Wakefield, Ryan Smith, Andrew Trophy, Becca Brown, and Christiana Line. Thank you all again so much for supporting us. If you would like to leave us some listener feedback or send me a gift because I've been left out over here, you can do that at our P.O. Box, which you can find in the episode's description. You can also call us at 406-646-6733 or email us at hello@lamppostlistener.com. You feel like it looks like you're going to say something.
I send Daniel something licorice flavored.
Well, I wouldn't want that.
Right. Careful what you wish for.
No. Also go over to
These little butterscotch toffee.
just put
Put a stamp on a banana and mail that.
I was gonna say just put in a plastic bag and then address it to us with the stamp of maybe I'm trying to think what would be. Oh, you know what? Turkish Delight, and then you'll be investigated for anthrax.
Right.
Don't.
You
I don't think it's a thing anymore, right?
You can't send powdered cubes. It's still
No, but like
the
there's not.
chemical is still a thing.
No, I know that, but like after like 2003, 2004, weren't we like all afraid of anthrax?
Yeah.
But not-
no one's really afraid of it anymore.
No one's really afraid of it anymore. I don't really know what it is.
I
just know
think
it's
we
like
shouldn't
white
be
powder.
licking envelopes. I sent out all the stickers to our Patreon.
Did you lick all their envelopes?
I licked all the envelopes and I
Oh,
thought
gross.
I feel like we should move beyond this. I think COVID eliminated handshakes. It's no longer expected.
Okay, that's because you're a remote worker. There are still handshakes happening everywhere else in the world. That didn't actually stop.
Oh, that's why
I think that's why I'm a remote worker.
we still have to do all this.
Interesting. What do you do like with your family Christmas cards? Do you lick all those envelopes?
Yeah.
That's gross, dude. I just get like a wet paper towel.
I do think that when we do the higher volume stuff like Christmas cards, it might be dipping a paper towel in some water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually recently started handing it to my son. I'm like, just start licking this stuff, man. Other than now, like he's the one that gets sick the most because he's in school, and so
Yeah. It's
But
all those paper cuts he gets on
we're
his tongue.
here's some holiday greetings and the flu right there from the Payne family.
It's like when we all got sent home for COVID and people were blowing bubbles. It's like that's the one thing.
Wait, who was blowing bubbles after
Everyone
COVID?
was blowing bubbles.
What are you talking about? like bubbles from like Toys R Us? Like
Most stories, if you catch someone exaggerating, they get down to one person was blowing bubbles and it's like, oh, was it your neighbor? No, it was someone on Twitter saw someone who was blowing bubbles. So one person in the country is blowing bubbles.
I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
This person was expressing displeasure that their neighbor was blowing bubbles and that they were concerned they were going to get
COVID was going to come
because
over
there are
them.
these floating little biocontaminant
Oh wow, yeah.
things coming over.
I
the
think that's how it
fence.
got started.
Yeah, it was
Dude,
someone ate a bubble.
Someone started blowing bubbles. They did it the wrong way. They used that. You know how like there's the thick end and the small end of the bubble thing. No one ever uses the small one.
Right.
They were the first person to use it.
We're gonna get one of those little flags. From
Oh,
all
the CDC is gonna flag the podcast now.
saying these statements haven't been verified by the
Or
CDC.
you go like on a YouTube video. It's like we need to give you the AP News result or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's stop before we do go ahead and get a a clamp down on our podcast from
can we add a
Apple.
few words? Like, can I say, or are you going to take that out?
No, stop that. Don't do that. All right, let's go ahead and finish up again. Because we're probably going to get in trouble with the CDC, please go ahead and leave us a review somewhere. We need it right now.
Or send cash.
To the P.O. Box in my name, not Phil's. He's already gotten some gifts. This will always, as we say, every week, or every other week, this will help listeners find the show and join together in our read-through. We are having so much fun going through The Princess and the Goblin, but the next time we're here, we will not be covering a chapter of the book. We're going to have
Everybody's favorite holiday.
C.S. Lewis Reading Day is coming up soon.
We should take the day off.
It's a Friday, so I do go home every Friday at 1 o'clock,
Yeah,
so that is kind of nice.
you do.
You get to work in your pajamas, so whatever. Let's end the episode before, and we'll argue off camera. We don't get another bad review. All right, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See you soon.